In this chapter, we're going to be introduced to management and managing. It'll set the foundation for the rest of the course. If you've taken an Intro to Business class, you'll see that the topics covered under management in that class will be gone over in much more depth in this class. And hopefully, if you've had a job, you'll start to understand the concepts in the context of your job. And I hope you share those experiences, because I find when we can come up with multiple examples, it makes it easier to relate to the concepts and understand them. So let's move on and start with the definition of management. Management is a set of activities directed at an organization's resources with the aim of achieving organizational goals in an efficient and effective manner. Now we're going to go through all of these things in more detail, but I just want to point out that the activities we're talking about that are listed here are the functions of management. There are 4 functions of management: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And that's how this textbook and the course is set up. We will be moving through the different functions as we move through the course. You'll see that planning and decision making are put together as the first item. This book puts decision making in with planning as a function of management. I just want to make a point and point out that decision making happens with everything a manager does. So yes, you make decisions when you're in the planning stages, but you're also making decisions as you work through the organizing, leading, and controlling functions of management. We're also going to look at the organization's resources. And as you can see, we have human resources, financial resources, physical, and information resources. And then we'll also talk about how we can meet goals in efficient and effective ways. Here are some examples of resources used by organizations. So we see we have 4 different types of organizations. We have a corporation at the top, Royal Dutch Shell. We have a university, which would be a nonprofit. We have a city, and we also have a small business. And for each of these, you can see the different examples of human resources, financial resources, physical resources, and information resources that are used by organizations. These are the resources that we have at our disposal to try and meet our organizational goals and apply the functions of management to. How are we going to plan? And we'll talk about that definition in a minute. But how are we going to organize our business and structure it? How are we going to motivate our workforce to meet the goals that we've set? And then how do we make sure that we stay on track with the goals that we're setting? In our management definition, we talked about being efficient and effective. We can be both efficient and effective. We could be efficient but not effective. We can be effective and not efficient. Okay, so when we're efficient, we're using our resources wisely and in a cost-effective way. If we're being effective, we've made the right decisions and we're successfully implementing them. So ideally, we want to do both. We want to make effective decisions and carry them out in the most efficient way. We don't want to waste resources, but it can happen where we might have one and not the other. For instance, I might be the most efficient production facility for making, let's say, black and white TVs. That's great, but if no one wants to buy a black and white TV, right, then that's not an effective decision. I'm not being effective because there's not a market for the product that I can make really efficiently. I can be very effective and make a decision to have a product that everybody wants, but if I'm not efficient and I'm using too many labor hours to make this product or wasting too many materials, right, then I'm not efficient. So the ideal situation is to be both efficient and effective. Now let's talk a little more about the different functions of management. So the first function we talk about is planning and decision making. This is where we establish our goals and decide how we're going to achieve them. Then we have organizing, which is coordinating the activities and resources of the organization. I want to be clear, when we talk about the functions of management, organizing is not to be used in the same way we might say a person is very organized in their personality trait, right? Organizing for the functions of management is used specifically to talk about how we structure the organization. How many departments do we have? Who reports to who? The chain of command, all these structural elements of our organization or our business. So we have a whole chapter devoted to organizing and that function of management. Then we have leading. This function is about motivating and managing people, trying to motivate our workforce to meet the goals of the organization. And lastly, we have controlling, which is monitoring and evaluating our activities and tracking the progress we're making towards the organization's goals. While we've gone through these functions in the order of starting with planning and decision making, then organizing, then leading, then controlling, and as you can see on this chart, we see these solid lines going from one to the next. But in reality, we don't necessarily go in a linear fashion. We can bounce between different activities. We can be doing multiple things simultaneously, and that's what is represented by these dashed lines. So we typically start with planning and decision making because we need to have goals. And we usually end with the controlling function because we have to see if we've made progress towards those goals. But in between, we're actually doing these things in any given order or simultaneously. Now that we understand a little more about the management process, let's look at the different levels of management. We have these 3 levels of management: top, middle, and first line, which we can also call the supervisory management level. Under each of these, we see there are different titles that are appropriate, but there's also different responsibilities at each level. Top management would be titles like the CEO, which is the Chief Executive Officer, the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, President, Vice Presidents. This is a smaller group of executives who manage the overall organization. They take a very broad view of the organization and they create the overall goals of the organization, strategy, and operating policies. The next level down is middle management. Examples of titles here would be directors, department heads, regional directors, those types of titles. They're primarily responsible for implementing the policies and plans from top management, and they also supervise and coordinate the activities of lower level managers. Then we have first line management or supervisory management. Titles here are typically supervisors, and they supervise and coordinate the activities of the operating employees. So first line management is the last level of management before you have non-managers, so employees without managerial responsibilities. So we can also look at managers not only by the level of management they're in, but also the area they're in. So as you can see along the bottom here, we have a marketing department, finance, operations, human resources, administration, and any other department. We can have first line, middle, and top managers in each area. Henry Mintzberg studied CEOs. He observed their behavior and was able to classify their behavior into 10 different roles that senior managers play. The 10 roles fell into 3 general categories: interpersonal roles, such as the figurehead, leader, or liaison for the organization, involved dealing with other people. The informational roles, such as the monitor, disseminator, and spokesperson, involved processing information. And lastly, decisional roles, such as entrepreneur, disturbance handler, resource allocator, negotiator, related primarily to making decisions. This research was conducted back in 1973. And so while some of these roles may be less important today or more important, and there might be new roles that have emerged with the change in technology and globalization, it's important to note that managers do have different roles they play as they work for an organization. In addition to fulfilling roles, managers need a bunch of different skills in order to be successful. If you're lacking in any of these skills, it's important to note that since they're skills, they can be improved upon. I just want to touch on a few of these skills just to give you a little more information. Technical skills. These are specific to the kind of work you're doing. So for example, if you are an accountant working with debits and credits, that's very specific to the job you're doing. That is a technical skill, but it can be, the same can be said for someone in retail who works in a store. Knowing how to work the inventory management system or the cash registers are also technical skills for doing your specific job. I also want to touch on conceptual skills. Another way to look at conceptual skills would be being able to see the big picture, okay? Thinking in the abstract, being able to see how one part of the organization might impact another part of the organization, being able to see that big picture and not get lost on the day-to-day stuff. Very important for upper managers. Next, we have communication skills, which are kind of a subset of interpersonal skills. But when we talk about communication skills, it's the ability to effectively communicate or convey those ideas to others and receive ideas from others and information. And there are many ways this can go wrong based on the choice of language you use, the way you communicate it, whether you do something face-to-face or through email. Your nonverbal cues can all impact communication. And one of the most important skills for managers, important at every level of management. Those interpersonal skills involve communication, but also how to get along with people, the more social skills, how to motivate both individuals and groups. And then we have these other skills like time management, decision making, and diagnostic skills. So when we talk about management, is it a science or is it an art? So the science of management assumes that you can approach problems, opportunities even, in a rational, logical, objective, and systematic way, using these technical, diagnostic, and decision-making skills and techniques to solve problems. And we're going to learn a lot of the science of management in this course, and we will apply those things. But there's also an art to management. When you're making decisions and solving problems, you do use your experience, your instinct, your intuition, and your personal insights. So yes, we will learn the process that you go through to make a decision, the steps in the decision-making process, but sometimes you have to go with your intuition. When you're doing a communication, you know how to properly write something, but choosing how you deliver a message or the tone that something should take is more of an art. And you'll see with motivating people, it can be an art balancing that. So using our conceptual, our communication, our interpersonal skills are more of the art of management. You'll acquire these skills through both your education as well as job experiences. You'll find that you'll have managers that are amazing and you'll learn from them, and you'll have managers that are absolutely horrible, but you will learn from them too, and from that you might learn what not to do. But even through your education, as you get into more difficult coursework, more involved projects, working with teams and groups, you'll be honing those interpersonal skills, your communication skills, as well as your conceptual skills as you have to coordinate larger projects and more activities. Wrapping up this chapter, we have to talk about the workplace. What is it like today in the workplace? You have to create an environment for your workers that is attractive. So it's offering the right balance of benefits and pay and the working environment. You need to have proper incentives to motivate a very diverse workforce. Change has become the constant here. You have to be able to change, and we see that no more evidently than today when we have to modify how we offer classes. Technology is always changing, and we need to keep up with it and be prepared for the future. And there's all different ways to organize our workplace. We can have remote work. As we can see, it can be very effective. So it's always a challenge. As things advance, it keeps us on our toes as we try to keep pace with it and change as things change around us. Here are the basic skills.